May 21st, 2024 is called to order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Council Callahan. Vice President Collins.
Present.
Council Lozaro.
Present.
Council Levin.
Present.
Council Scarpelli. Council Sang. President Paris.
Present 7, present not absent. This meeting is called to order. There'll be a meeting of the Medford City Council Committee of the Whole at 7 p.m. in the City Council Chamber, second floor, Medford City Hall, 85 George B. Hassett Drive, Medford, Massachusetts, and via Zoom. Purpose of this meeting is to discuss paper 24-045, the annual budget process for fiscal 25. This is preliminary budget meeting 7. This is the 7th preliminary budget meeting. The mayor has communicated the following departments will be present: the Health Department, Medford Public Schools, and the Department of Planning, Development, and Sustainability. We will be hearing first from the Health Department, and then we will go to the schools and Planning and Development, Sustainability, unless Planning, Development, Sustainability makes it in time. So we will go first to you, Director O'Connor. Welcome back. You feel free to sit if you'd like. And what I'm going to do, if you haven't been watching the barn burner budget meetings we've been having, is I'm going to read the fiscal 24 budget, the fiscal 25 budget, any headcount changes, and then I'll go through the change sheet on the back, and then I'll turn it over to you to fill in anything that I missed, to share your narrative. And also, one thing we'd love to hear is if there's stuff that your department would like to be doing that you didn't request in this budget that you are hoping to get in future budgets. That is definitely a priority of the council. We know it's a tough budget year, but we also know there's a lot of needs in the city that need to be met. So we'd love to hear that. But with that, I will start us off. We have Department 510, 519. That is our Board of Health and Animal Control fiscal 24 budget, $776,510. Fiscal 25 proposed budget, $806,185.93. The fiscal 24 headcount was 11. The proposed fiscal 25 headcount is 10. I believe that's a reduction of 1 part-time nurse. And the entire increase from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25 is a fixed cost growth increase. No new programs are being planned. This is an increase due to 2% non-union pay increases, step increases, and two employees who are fully funded through ARPA who are now going to be funded 50% through ARPA and 50% through the general fund. And those are offset again by a decrease in the part-time employees and some very minor changes in the ordinary expenses. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Director O'Connor. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, we've had some vacant positions for a while now, but that's starting to work out, and we're going to be hiring an additional inspector starting on June 3rd, as well as our manager of prevention and outreach will be starting on June 3rd.
Director, one second. The microphone may not be on. Are you seeing the light?
It's green.
It is on? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Is that better? So yes, so we've had some vacant positions for a little bit now as far as the inspectors go, but that's looking better. We're going to be hiring another inspector coming on June 3rd. Also, our new prevention and outreach manager will be starting on June 3rd as well. So that's a really big help. But I'm very grateful that we've added a couple of positions. Our community social worker and some additional administrative support who were funded by ARPA, but now will be going on to the general fund. So I'm very grateful for that. We're getting to where we need to be, and I believe that that's what this budget shows. A lot of the work we're able to do, though, through our prevention and outreach work is funded through grant work. We were lucky enough to get a $500,000 Bar Foundation grant this year, in addition to our MVP grant, which supports our community and climate resilience work. So we're very grateful about that. We also will be now tapping into our opioid funds going forward to help with our recovery coach and also our recovery support programming. And then we also are part of what's called a regional public health excellence grant with 4 other communities, which again allows us to supplement a lot of the work that we do. And we're going to be getting that for the next 5 years. So we've been lucky to use that to help with additional food inspections. We're going to be bringing on an epidemiologist for the region and also a communications person for the region. So that's all going to be handled by that grant. So that's all work that I was looking forward to doing, especially the epidemiologist. Is very exciting. But of course, we're still dealing with our inspectional side of life and trying to address all of the complaints. And again, that new inspector coming on June 3rd will certainly be helpful in that regards. So I think that's it. If there's any questions.
Any questions? Counselor Sang?
Thank you. Would you be able to speak to the community liaison program if we're going to be able to keep that on?
Yes, so the community liaison program, again, is going to be funded through, still through APA, but also now supplemented by that Bar Foundation grant I talked about. So we'll be able to keep on the community liaisons. Our MVP with our community connectors, that grant ends at the end of June, but we have submitted a new grant. Unfortunately, we won't probably hear from that until September. So again, we're hoping to use these Bar Foundation funds to tide us over with the connectors for the summer months until we are awarded, and I'm being very positive that we will be awarded that next round of funding in September.
I'm glad to hear that. I think that's that was one of the priorities of the council, as well as making sure we were able to hire a prevention outreach coordinator. I'm very happy to hear that we've made a lot of progress on that we'll have someone starting. I'm excited to welcome them to Medford. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Sang. Vice President Collins?
Thank you so much for being here, as always, and for walking us through the budget. It's always great to hear about how certain positions and capacity in the city are being funded by grant funding. I know that your office always does a really great job of leveraging that. Just a quick clarification on some of the personnel. You walked us through the community social worker and the administrative support that's being funded through some of the grants that you just mentioned. I saw that one of the part-time nurses looks like it's coming offline, or maybe that was just reallocated. Could you speak to that?
So the part-time nurse monies was reallocated to assist with the community social worker position, I believe. But we have, again, a revolving account. That's our vaccine account, dispensing account, and we in need of a part-time nurse, mostly through those flu seasons when we're doing those clinics and such, to help Jillian with those clinics. So we were able to look at that fund that we have and decide that we could use that monies to assist with any part-time nursing staff that she might need.
Great. Thank you. And just to clarify, so is that monies that are available for a seasonal nurse, or is that it's more appropriate to use that funding for the community social worker at this time?
I'm sorry.
Just to make sure I understood you correctly, is it that are being put towards a seasonal nurse, like during the flu season, or is it that it's being reallocated to the social worker?
So the monies for the seasonal nurse during the flu seasons will be coming from the vaccine account.
Okay.
And the money that was in the budget for the part-time nurse was reallocated to the community social worker. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I think the AC makes it even harder to hear than normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Collins. Counselor Scarpelli?
Thank you, President Beers. My question might not be for you, Mr. Khan, but I'm looking for, I know that I might have missed it, but I know that we lost a valuable member of our team here to a new position, but our outreach manager for prevention and outreach, do you know if we're filling that position or if it's been filled? Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, it's been filled. She'll be beginning on June 3rd.
Oh, great. Now, will it be under your department? Oh, perfect. Okay. Great. Obviously, big shoes to fill. He was
Yes.
amazing. So,
Yes.
but okay, that's all I had. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Counselor Callahan?
Just one question. As a newbie counselor, there are a number of the canine services, canine workers maintenance. I'm just curious about this.
So animal control falls under the health department. So canine services, so it's kind of funny, canine services, or dog kennel, I guess I should say. Is that what it says? Dog kennel, canine services? Yeah. That also includes our Eastern Middlesex mosquito control contract, which it's kind of funny that it's under canine services, but that's about $27,000 a year. Yeah, so that actually went up, it goes up every year, so this year it's a little over 27,000. But we do also have to pay for dog kennel services if we pick up a stray dog, if we pick up a dangerous dog, so we do have to pay for boarding for dogs that we pick up.
Counselor Sang?
Very quickly, because we've already had meetings on this topic, but I know some residents are curious. On the topic of rodent prevention, we're working on ordinances on our front to help with that. Your office has been doing a lot. Does this budget allow you to keep doing the work that you need to do to work on education and mitigation when it comes to rodents?
Yes, in our budget, we have some monies put aside for, in other services and professional services for the education and the outreach. But we are going to be looking to, and I'm working with Mike Roberts to come up with a contract and possibly go out to bid so that we can come up with a contract that would address professional, rodent services through, I believe, 2026.
Thank you, Councillor Sang. Any further questions by members of the council? Seeing none, I have two. Number one, could you say, like, and it doesn't have to be exact, but approximately how much of the programming of the health department is grant funded?
I would say probably equal match.
50-50.
Yeah. So this budget, really goes to the environmental side of life, and the animal control. And then the grant funding really funds all of our prevention and outreach work.
Okay. Is that grant funding stable and reliable? And I guess we love the prevention outreach work. We want to fund it. So how reliable and stable is the grant funding, and how much, if you're thinking about if the grants were all gone tomorrow, how much of that would you want to bring onto the general fund so that we could keep doing it?
Well, our grants are pretty hefty right now, but one of them is a regional grant, which is $250,000 a year. But again, that's a regional grant for 5 communities to address youth substance use. The $500,000 is over the next 3 years to help with the climate change work and the resiliency work. That won't be sustainable if we don't get the next round of MVP, which would be after this. But the state has really touted our program as kind of one of the model programs. So I'd find it highly unlikely that we wouldn't get funding to continue. But again, that's $200,000 a year. And then the opioid funding will be coming for the next, over a decade or so. And that, if we budget it outright, we're looking probably to about $100,000 to $150,000 a year.
So the opioid's pretty stable. The state funding for resiliency is good for about 3 years, but we would need to have that renewed. Otherwise, that would go away. And then some of the grants are even shorter term than that.
Right.
Right. And this is probably a leading question, but I'm guessing you'd want to keep doing all of that.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a very important part of public health. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate just understanding that and understanding basically half of the work of our health department that we see isn't coming out of the general fund right now, which I think is a testament. I think finding those grants is great, but we're not talking about doing something a one-off. We're talking about things we want to keep doing. And sometimes grant funding isn't always there. So any further questions from members of the council for our director of the health department? Seeing none, are there any questions or comments by members of the public on the health department budget? Seeing no one in the room and no hands raised on Zoom, I think we're all set. Director O'Connor.
Civil defense?
Oh, we do have to do civil defense. Thank you, Councilor Scarpelli. The one thing I want to say also, if we do see a significant difference between what we talked about tonight and what we get in the budget proposal, not that we expect that, but if we do, we may invite you back here in June.
Just want to make sure.
This is a new budget process, and we've been really working hard with the administration to do things a bit earlier. That's why you're here in May, before we've seen the budget. But if the administration wants to have you back, or if you want to come back, or if we want you to come back, we could see you again in June. So, sure. Civil defense, we have fiscal 24 budget, $99,390, fiscal 25 budget, $9,840. And this looks like it is just an increase in the public safety supplies and the dues, conferences, and travel. And if there's anything else you want to share on that.
No, the dues, conferences, and travel, we are also part of, even though we're beginning to establish our local emergency planning committee, we've already, this year, able to start our internal team. The dues, conferences, and travel goes to the Regional Emergency Planning Committee, the Mystic Valley Regional Emergency Planning Committee. So there are membership dues to belong to that.
Got it. All right, any questions, Counselor Scarpelli?
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, thanks. Just one question. I know I mentioned to the Chief of Staff on Saturday, we did the tour of the fire station. Have we connected with the auxiliary group and told them that we're moving on? Is it?
Joe and I, yes, we have had discussions, but we are meeting with the mayor on May 28th in the afternoon, next Tuesday, I believe.
Okay, so it still might proceed?
We're looking at, and they seem to be very interested in pursuing the Medical Reserve Corps route
So
as
it's a
far as
different type?
volunteering.
So they wouldn't need the trucks and all the
Correct.
apparatus. I know the chief was also reaching out to let them know that they're trying to find, there was some equipment that they said
Yes.
that, okay. All right, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Counselor Scarpelli, any further questions? Seeing none, any questions from members of the public on civil defense? Seeing none, I will just say, up at the station in the Heights, there's some great civil defense stuff from about 1953. So if you want some old blood transfusion kits or 60-year-old biscuits,
Geiger counters,
yeah, that was pretty wild to see. That was just, yeah. So, didn't know about it. Hi, member of the public, want to comment on the health department?
I want to ask a question regarding the health department.
Sure, you can make a comment to me and
Okay,
it's
I
up
don't know how
to the director.
this works.
Yes. If you could yes, you can sit down and give your name and address for the record and happy
Well,
to,
sit because it's
hear your
about the
comment.
Health department.
you can direct your comments to me and then we'll go back to the
Okay,
director.
no,
when you're
I'm a
done.
nice person.
No, it's just.
Okay,
It's
just an FYI.
it's a formality. It's totally just
Okay.
technically all comments have to go through the
All
chair.
right, my name's Dana Alberto. I'm 596 High Street, Medford. And the reason why I wanted to ask regarding the health department, does that have to do with the rat situation?
It does.
Because I have a bad problem in my home. I practically fist fight them. I've had the exterminator come out twice. I've called Amelia at City Hall here that works in the department. She had someone come out, but they weren't that helpful. They just came and left, looked around and said, oh, everything looks great. I set traps left and right. I catch them. It's getting to be like, they're like part of my house. They're like residents. I'm going to have to start naming them now. It's terrible. I know I live in an old home. It's in the 1800s. I go around, I block holes. They just seem to find a way in.
Yeah.
But they are everywhere. It's not just in my house. I'll go walk my dog. They're at Duggar Park. They're everywhere. So I was wondering, I didn't know what to do or whatever. 596 High Street.
So I can share a couple things and then the director, however you would like to share. We have been working, the director shared a little bit earlier about rodent control. Some
Yeah.
things we've done is we passed an ordinance a couple years ago now. We require any new construction to have a pest
Yeah.
management plan. We've been trying to build in more and more as much as we can on the rodent control with the guidance and advice of the health department.
Okay.
Beyond that, that's really our role in it. Definitely Director O'Connor is the person to talk to or the
Okay.
health office. It may behoove us if you have a minute to talk after the testimony, if that's all right with you.
Yeah,
All right, great.
Great.
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right. Any further comments on the health department or civil defense? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go Celtics.
Celtics on?
I wish. Wouldn't it be nice right here in the big screen? All right. Give me one moment. I want to see if we have Director Hunt. I think sadly we're not going to make it. So PDS will go after the public schools. So next we'll hear from Medford Public Schools. Our superintendent, Dr. Maurice Edward Vincent, and our director of finance are here with us. We have some school committee members in the chamber and on Zoom as well. So excited to be here. It's a little different here. So for every department that we've heard up until this point, the city council looks at line item budgets. For the school, Medford Public Schools, there's a different process, obviously, because there is a school committee. So what happened so far, the school committee has done its process of developing a budget along with the school administration. Last night, the school committee made a formal request to the city of Medford for an amount that is budgeted. The mayor will then allocate an amount for the Medford Public Schools, and the city council only has the authority to approve that amount or to cut that amount. We cannot increase it. We cannot approve the budget that the school committee requested last night. All we can do is approve or cut the mayor's request. So that's how the process works. I appreciate some of the outreach that we've gotten today, asking us to approve the school committee's request that was proposed last night, but that's not how general law process works. So I just wanted to make that clear before we started. That certainly doesn't mean that I think many of the people behind this rail certainly support the request of the school committee and support funding our public schools. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Edward Vincent. I just want to very quickly, if I can pull it up, just note that the school committee request to the municipal government for fiscal 25 was $79,399,774. That's an increase from the fiscal 24 general fund request of $71,200,000. And with that, Madam Superintendent.
Good evening, Council President Beers and distinguished members of the City Council. I am pleased to be here this evening to present our annual budget. I am the proud superintendent of Medford Public Schools, and my name is Dr. Maurice Edward Vincent. And this evening, I am here with Mr. Gerald McHugh, affectionately known as Jerry. He is our finance director, and so he will be going through a slide deck to present the school committee's recommended number of $79,399,774 to you this evening. And at the end of this presentation, we are prepared to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Thank you, Mr. McHugh.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a number of issues we're trying to deal with in the budget this year. We had, our collective bargaining agreements, of course, that are legal obligation of the school department. We have all these positions that are integral to the operations of the school department on ESSA funding, which has expired. We identified a number of accounts for a variety, I guess, for whatever reason, were kind of chronically underfunded. The budgets were not aligned to the historic spending in these accounts. And then we have new spending requests to shore up the budget. So the increase is significant, but I think it's based on a level service budget to keep the school department going in FY25. So just a couple of data points that we look at as we try to develop the budget. The first one is enrollment. The school system is showing some growth at the lower grades. We had some high kindergartens this year that were addressed, and our projections will continue to show some growth in the elementary grades, although next year's grade 2 is somewhat of an outlier. My thinking on that is that, those students were just going into kindergarten as school systems were kind of coming out of remote learning and back into classrooms, and that might have affected those kindergartens in that year. But kindergarten is something that we continue to monitor. We note that the registration activity at the Brooks School is high for this time of year, so we're looking at that. The other 3 elementary schools, the kindergartens, are more or less on track for what we're predicting in 2025. And we continue to see slight declines in the middle school and high school enrollment. The other thing, so these are our totals for each grade group. You could see that we're expecting on a total basis very slight increase, but you could see in the grades 1 through 5 the growth that I talked about, and then the declines in the upper grades. The next slide is on foundation budget. So we anxiously await the recommendation of the governor in January. Unfortunately, it wasn't great news for Medford in terms of Chapter 70 aid. In FY24, the city, I believe the Chapter 70 aid went up about $3.5 million, and I was hoping that we'd see a similar bump, but we could see that the foundation enrollment declined from FY24 to FY25, so that caused Medford to be in a kind of a minimum student aid category where your Chapter 78 is hold harmless, even though it should theoretically go down because enrollment went down. The state always has a hold harmless clause for Chapter 78, so you'll at least get the amount you got the prior year. And then typically there's a $30 per student minimum aid that school systems qualify for if they're not eligible for Chapter 78. And typically what happens is the state calculates a foundation budget, which they use standard per pupil rates for all kinds of spending that school departments engage in. And they multiply that out across the enrollment. And there's different rates for different things in high schools and elementary grades and pre-K. That all rolls up to a foundation budget. And then the state determines through formulas how much of that foundation budget will the city of Medford be required to contribute to. And then the difference between the foundation budget and the required contribution is what the foundation aid is. There was some good news, though. The House budget, when passed, provided an increase in minimum student aid from $30 to $104 per student, and this resulted in an increase of $470,000 in Chapter 70 funding. The Senate Ways and Means Committee released its budget, I think, towards the end of last week, and they're debating it now. And the House Ways and Means budget also includes the $104 per student. So we're not going to know for certain how much we'll get in Chapter 70 until the budget passes and the governor signs the budget. But this means that it's very likely that that will be the Chapter 70 funding for Medford. And this is just a snapshot of our current staff. Most of the staff, as you would imagine, is within the teaching and nursing and counselor ranks. And we have a complement of paraprofessionals that assist in the instruction of our students. So when we developed the budget, we, as I said, we looked at 4 categories. And the first one was, what are our obligations to our staff in terms of collective bargaining agreements? We have a number of our agreements in force right now through FY25 and beyond. And those agreements we project in FY25 will increase our salary budgets by a little over $3.3 million. And then we're creating a salary reserve for 3 contracts that are up at the end of FY24. So the total salary increase is just slightly over $4 million. The next area is these accounts that were historically underfunded. For instance, homeless transportation, which is hard to predict. And I don't know if the council is aware, but there's a requirement, and I'm in complete support of this. There's a requirement that if a family becomes homeless, the students in the school system can remain in that school system, and you're obligated to transport those students from wherever they wind up back to their home school district. And those charges are split between the sending district and the district that was formerly the home of that family. We have been running, spending in this account has been running $600,000 a year, but yet the budget is $130,000. So there was an argument to be made that, you don't know really if you're going to have the same level of transportation need for homeless as you do from one year to the next. But when you start to establish a trend, you have to address that in the budget. And similar with these other accounts, substitute coverage, these are accounts that typically run over their budgeted amounts. So it's really imperative that we try to get these accounts properly funded, because it just you start the school year with a deficit, in the event that all things being equal, you kind of spend your money the way you budget it. The next area that we looked at was ESSA, and as I stated, we had a number of positions that are integral to the operations of the program. Of course, a lot of ESSA funding was spent to support students during COVID and support the reentry into the school system. I mean, it seems it's not that long ago, but there were so many protocols that had to be implemented to ensure that students were safe in school, and that we could mitigate any contagious students and properly care for them as well. So we have a number of positions. Several of our newcomer program positions were funded on ESSA. We have adjustment counselors, all our school-based substitute teachers were funded in this account. Grants manager was funded in this account. So we are providing funding for those positions in the general fund this year, as well as some paraprofessional positions that are funded in a revolving fund. We're seeking to move those positions again over to general fund because the current funding is not sustainable. And then there's a variety of new spending. Our special education outplacements are going up. There's a state-approved a tuition increase of 4.7% for outplacement programs, and then we have some modest growth within those outplacement ranks. So that's almost $460,000. We have a network equipment budget for a school district that's entire student body and staff have devices now, and the budget is $30,000 to maintain the network. So we're seeking to increase that. And also we have a need to refresh our Chromebook inventory, and our, MacBooks that are allocated to staff. Also, buildings and grounds, would benefit from, new spending so we can, provide for, project management. We really need to do a space use study in our schools to avoid overcrowding that we're experiencing, particularly in the Roberts, and just kind of get some baseline data so we can start to think about some facilities master planning in the future, possibly redistricting. But we should make sure that we're using all the classroom space that was built with the intention of being a classroom as a classroom. And then we're also asking for 2 additional school buses. There was a lot of concern at the beginning of the school year about overcrowding on buses. We think that can be solved with the addition of 2 school buses, yellow buses. And some school supply increases and other. Also, there's a request to add a payroll supervisor and a HR assistant to build capacity in those areas and to provide some management to manage to plan out the work of those departments. So that results in an increase of almost $8.7 million. We identified some opportunities with fund balances in our revolving accounts to charge, at least for this school year, 2 teachers. That's constitutes about 200,000 of that 469 number, and then we will implement a plan to recover some administrative and facilities expenses that we that are being used by programs that charge fees, so that we can kind of recover some of those costs through those fee programs. And that when those additional resources are deducted, you come up with a budget of $79.4 million.
Thank you, Jerry. So just before we go to questions from counselors, I'm going to summarize once again the process here and some of the key numbers. There's a lot of great information. Really appreciate your presentation. So the request by the school committee as of last night is 79.4 million. Let's round up by a couple $100. Now, pursuant to the council's, the new city budget ordinance, I believe that the mayor provided an initial estimated allocation to the school system about in March.
Yes.
And that was 73.5 million. That was the initial recommendation, the estimate of what they believe the city could provide at that time.
Yes.
So that's a pretty big difference. It's almost $6 million between what was requested by the school committee and the initial estimate. I want to add just a couple more pieces of context. I believe the district, as you indicated in your letter, had proposed a 76.7 million budget, which changed. The school committee recommended this full budget. That 76.7 million included the variety of potential cuts that you had determined and were discussed at the school committee earlier this month. Maybe it was end of April, but a few weeks ago. And I also know that the administration has been working to try to increase that 73.5 million through finding other essentially changes on other city departments. So I just wanted to put that context in play, but really what has been going around the community a lot has been the discussion of the initial kind of batch of proposed cuts, which got to that 76.7 million number.
Yeah.
The school committee has requested the 79.4 million, which would, I don't want to get into specific line items because we don't control that, but would avoid many of those cuts if that 79.4 million was received. But the estimate was all the way down at 73.5 million. So we have Essentially a $6 million need to avoid the cuts that have already been discussed. A $3-something million need to pass a budget that includes those cuts that were discussed. And then if it's below that 76.7, we're talking about finding even more cuts beyond what was discussed at the meeting earlier a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that context out there. And then again, procedurally, the school committee has made a request. We are hearing from you a description of that request. We will receive in the official budget proposal by the mayor an allocation. And at that point, we can just approve or cut that total allocation to the schools. So that really is the council's role in the process. The mayor is the one who will propose the allocation. And it will be somewhere between the 73.5 million, which would require even more cuts that have been already discussed, and the 79.4 million, which would require, would fully fund this request and wouldn't include the cuts you described. So if you have anything you want to add to what I just said, I'd appreciate the context, but I just wanted to kind of summarize where we're at.
I know that that's accurate. We decided that we had an obligation to see what kind of savings we could generate, knowing that we're not going to be business as usual, with cuts, given the gap that we had between the initial allocation that we got from the city and what the actual need for a level services budget is. So we did go through an exercise of trying to use criteria to make some strategic cuts. There was, significant feedback from the community during our 2 budget meetings. Of course, no one and people are advocating, as they should, for different programs. We did present a package of $2.2 million worth of cuts that was almost exclusively staffing. We didn't want to get into a whole host of cuts around programs and curriculum and instructional needs beyond what we did. So we did identify another $2.7 million that we had a gap between if you went with the $2.3 million increase plus $2 million in cuts. So those.
That's the 73.5 million.
Right. And, another round of cuts will be significant, but, we also recognize that council has a lot of, has the whole city and its residents to be thinking about when you put a budget together. So we're hoping you can do the best you can with that budget, but we will have a balanced budget, with the appropriation that we're provided.
Thank you. Last thing I'm going to say before I turn it over to counselors is just one added piece of context for the discussion. This council, and I believe the administration, but the council has persistently identified over multiple fiscal years a need for additional funding for all of our departments and our public school system. We have discussed the structural underfunding of the city of Medford, including Medford Public Schools. And last year, myself and former council president Morrell were able to negotiate an agreement that was publicly presented to the council to create a financial task force to work on creating the budget ordinance, which we have passed, along with a couple of other items. And that financial task force has been meeting for several months. There was a public press release from the office of the mayor, March 31st, I believe, talking about our discussions to create a framework for a debt exclusion for the fire station and an override to address school funding as well as some street and sidewalk funding. Those conversations are ongoing. The discussions around this budget have laid bare the need. And I am confident that with the additional discussions between myself and Vice President Collins, Mayor Longo-Kern, Chief of Staff Nazarian, and Vice Chair of the School Committee, Jenny Graham, that we can create a proposal and bring it to the voters to address this structural issue. One of our goals with that, as we're still doing research given this discussion, is to see how much of that can address the issues in this year's budget and how that would work. So I personally have been deeply engaged in those discussions. I have, since the first day I ran for office and before, been a strong supporter of the need for additional revenue to provide sufficient funding for not just our schools, but the city as a whole. So I just wanted to add that context to the table. We are still working on that. I wish we had an answer sooner than we have them, but that's where we're at. And my hope is that the outcome of those negotiations would be putting something before the voters that would help address significant portion, if not most of this gap. So it will be up to the voters of the city of Medford, but I personally am confident in the voters that they want to fund our schools too. So with that, I will go to Vice President Collins, Councilor Scarpelli, Councilor Lazar. Vice President Collins.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the presentation. I always appreciate the very thorough walkthrough that you give us into the school committee's recommendation. Of course, as has been stated, the city council has no jurisdiction when it comes to line items, when it comes to how the schools department chooses to spend whatever appropriation it's given each year. That is beyond our scope, but still I find it really helpful context for understanding the number that comes before us. So thank you so much for that. Speaking of individual line items, for myself as an individual counselor, like anybody else in the city, I hold individual opinions about particular positions or programs that to me seem really vital and important, that seem like they must be protected. But as a counselor in this role, it is deeply important to me that we advance a budget that gives advance a budget plan that gives our schools administration the latitude to do right by students, families, educators, all school staff. And it's my understanding that that's the number that was just explained to us. This year, I am optimistically expected to cast a yes vote for a budget that includes this school's appropriation for the $79 million, that puts students and families' minds at ease, that is fair to teachers and school workers, and that gives our public schools the ability to start doing more rather than less. And that isn't a reflection whatsoever on the district. I don't think we're coming off of a pandemic. We know we're in a really difficult fiscal situation, but based on what I hear from the community, I think that there's this widespread consensus that we have to start improving, and we have to be really serious about what that takes. That personally, I think that education is one of the most important services that a city provides, and our budget should reflect that by meeting the school committee request. President Beer spoke a little bit about the need for additional revenues to make that manifest, and about the work that the financial task force has been doing around that question for months. That's still being worked out. We've been having some really, some tough conversations, some productive conversations. But I believe that this community is ready to do what it takes to say, this is the fiscal year when we're going to pivot towards making public education better in Medford, and better for everybody who interacts with that system, and competitive with the other options that are out there. When it comes to talking about, the Prop 2.5 override, that is probably, I don't think it's probably likely. I think it's definitely needed to maintain level service in the city and start making strides towards not just level service, but improved service. This is something that I have been, publicly advocating for the last two budget cycles, because we need to start preventing exactly the type of cuts that are being talked about, that are in the realm of possibility if we don't change course. And I think that many people are in the community are at the point of saying this chronic underfunding can't go on any longer. I don't want to turn this into a conversation about increased revenues, but with the number that's before us, and knowing that it's not an invisible asterisk, I think it's a very obvious asterisk next to that number is what will it take to get there. I know that the conversation about that should be comprehensive. It should take as long as it needs to. I know that something that will come up in that question is what will it cost to do that, to fulfill this request and all that it will mean for students and teachers and families. What will it cost people to do that? And what I think about when I think about that question, what I think about with the various versions of the school department budget that have been put before the community is, what does it cost the community when we don't do that? What does it cost in tutoring fees? What does it cost in private school tuition? And the people who simply can't afford to augment the public school experience, it costs them most of all. So I thank you very much for this presentation. As one counselor, President Beers has, I was planning to start my spiel with, again, hammering home what role we do have in this process and what role we don't have at this point. I think that's already been well taken care of. But as myself as one counselor tonight, I'm very supportive of this version of the schools department budget. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with the mayor's office, with my fellow colleagues, both behind the rail and as a member of the financial task force, to come up with a plan to pass a budget that meets this request and maintains level service across all of our critical areas in the city. Thank you again.
Thank you, Vice President
you.
Collins. Councillor Scarpelli.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me disclose that I do have a family member that is a teacher. I've contacted the Ethics Commission, and the protocol is that I can be present because we're not discussing any votes. So I will not hide in a side chair or anything like that. I'll stand in front, and you can ask any questions if and I'll respond. The way the process goes, I was told to inform the public, because it was a little confusing yesterday, that the night of the budget meeting, that when we go to vote, I will ask when we get to the school department budget that we sever elementary education piece to be voted separately. I'll exclude myself, the council will vote on that part, and then I can come back in to be part of the procedure. So I think that there was some confusion of what the process is when you have a family member that's in the system. So again, I appreciate your presence. I know that Council Beers made a presentation about where we are right now. I will share the conversation on June 20th of last year. I felt like Nostradamus, Mr. McHugh, because I sat in front of this body and I explained how tragic and how devastating, if we funded the budget the way that we were going last year, where would we be today? And it's happening. It's happening, and there's nothing we can do. My fellow councilors, like Councilor Bear said, did meet behind closed doors with the mayor and came up with a plan with another member of the council and to set up this financial group. This financial group, I guess, has been meeting since April. Are you part of that financial group?
I am not.
No?
We've been
Is
meeting
Mr.
since
Dickerson?
We've been
is Mr.
meeting since September of
Okay, September,
2023.
excuse me. So is Mr. Dickerson part of that group? Our city financial director?
We have requested information from city finance department staff as needed.
Okay, so on a day-to-day basis during these meetings, 'cause I don't see any minutes. I wouldn't know what's going on in those meetings. What I do know is that they've been meeting, and we've come to a conclusion after knowing for over a year now, because it was publicly stated, we're going to be in drastic financial need. But we've known in a year, and I'm going to have some questions about that later, but we've known for a year that we are in a devastating situation. We knew we were going to be here. And what we've heard back was the mayor announced that we're going to look at debt exclusion and overrides, which is very, very irresponsible, for the fact that when other communities present overrides or debt exclusions, it's part of a transparent process where it's discussed, it's presented so the community as a whole understands what this process looks like. What happened that evening when the mayor pronounced, after you said, I believe that you were talking, that we were going to have a $5.5 million shortfall, and the mayor jumped back and said, it's the first time I heard of that. I only thought it was $500,000. Really? They've had a working group since September, and that's the first time they've heard that. So as we move forward with this process, we're seeing the mayor present that evening that we're now going to focus on this working group that is going to look into an override and debt exclusions to get us to where we need to be. Irresponsible. I've been saying this for over a year now, more than a year. The lack of transparency and the mismanagement of finances in this community is pitiful. It's the reason why we're here today. We can look at zero new growth. We can look at confusing payments to law firms. that when I did my numbers from the actuals, over $470,000 paid to KP Law. You're seeing lawsuits. You're hearing all these different issues and why we are where we are. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't disagree with my fellow colleagues. My number one priority is to fund the school system where it needs to be so we can do the best we can for the most important people in our community, that's our children. I support it 1,000%, but it's how we get there. And that's what's frightening to me. Because right now, I don't see a transparent process. You have a few counselors and a school committee member working together with the mayor and the chief of staff without any financial professional with them on a day-to-day basis. And the mayor comes out and says, after these cuts, I'm going to look for a debt exclusion and I'm going to look for looking at an override to balance our budget. Oh, absolutely not. There's a way to do it, and I'll get to that when she comes to this body. But so I can understand this transparent process, if you can allow me to expand on this, is that where are these questions coming from? I bring up the point that I have some bullets that parents, teachers, administrators, myself come up with. The process why do we not have faith? Well, there was a Monday, we got an email saying that there was a shortfall in the FY24 budget of 2.5 million. And then on Friday, hey, we found 2.2 million or so, right? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
So I asked for a report much back in understanding that. So if you can allude to that, that'd be great for the
Yeah.
first question I have.
If I could just very quickly, in terms of the scope and scale of the involvement of the council leadership in the discussions with the city administration, as I noted, we've been meeting since September of 2023. I wouldn't say anything otherwise that there have been disagreements in that group about the scope and scale of our immediate and what an override or debt exclusion should look like. Through those meetings, we have narrowed that gap significantly. We have worked through the mechanisms available to us and our understanding of the immediate future, and that's how we arrived where we are today. One of the things we didn't know was what is new growth and what a local receipt's going to be. We didn't have that until the spring, right? So when it comes about the specific, we've been working through that. I'm hopeful that we're going to get somewhere. Would I have liked to have gotten somewhere earlier? Would I have liked information to have been earlier? Sure. But again, the council leadership met with the mayor last June. We publicly presented everything that was discussed. We made that agreement and the council voted to approve a budget based on those discussions. I understand you voted against it and I respect that. But we all we agreed last year, we knew we were going to be in a very tough place with one-time funding. ARPA and ESSER included. So, I appreciate the councilor's perspective. I understand that there's always room to do more, to be earlier, to have more information out there. But I do want to say that council leadership has been working diligently on that issue with the administration. And as I said earlier, I'm confident that we will find an answer that this community can rally around and support to make sure that our schools get the funding that they deserve.
And if I can, to that point of information, Mr. President, I think we agree to that. I think that we've talked not getting the information that you need, but what that evening on June 20th of last year, I think the biggest problem was the lack of information given to the complete council. And to be honest with you, even with this financial group, you keep saying the leadership, we talked about this last year, the leadership. Well, did you think maybe that getting us just monthly reports on what that leadership was working on? Because we didn't. And these are the things that I'm saying when I say about lack of transparency. That brings me to the first question that we talked about. So if you can, Mr. McHugh, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can give a quick recap on that. I arrived here in the middle of August, and it took me a while to kind of get my bearings and meet all the staff and get familiar with the accounting systems. In November, I believe, I started to put together a projection model to try to figure out where we were going to land on June 30th in terms of the budget. And I was alarmed that we did have a shortfall, and I felt without any kind of further investigation, that I had an obligation to let senior management know about this possibility, and we continue to work on it. And I have to thank the city's finance director, who agreed to kind of review all my spreadsheets on this. He discovered an error in the formula that I was using. We corrected it. That accounted for about $1 million. In the meantime, we were able to identify other resources that we could employ if, in fact, we did finish out the year, with a $1.5 million deficit. So, for instance, we believe we'll have a balance of about $200,000 in the ESSA fund that we can charge eligible expenses to. There's a state reimbursement for homeless transportation that's sitting in an account in the general fund that we could use for this purpose. So I was satisfied that even if we finished the year in a deficit, that there were a number of resources that we could employ to balance the budget.
Okay, so with that being said, you have to understand, I'm not blaming you. I think just understanding it, I think
Yeah.
that understanding you coming in August wasn't the best, it's not the best fit. So I understand that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't work 5 days a week, right? You're a consultant that works.
I am on the payroll. I have other responsibilities. My preference was to just work on the budget for this year. But there was a need, both the CFO and the assistant, by the time I got there, had both left. So there was, a staffing issue. So I agreed to work 3 days, which is, the most I could commit to at that
Again,
time.
it isn't, I just think that this is working 3 days with this type of budget and what you had to recover from. It's not fair to you. That
Yeah.
wasn't fair to you at all.
Well, I knew what I was getting into. I do have a lot of experience in government, and I've only worked in the public sector all my life, and I worked for 26 years for Chelsea Public Schools. So I knew what I was getting into. And those 3 days get stretched out during the last 3 months too, given the budget. But I think my role was to just come in and kind of do the budget analysis that was necessary to, as you say, to be transparent about what the true cost of operating Medford Public Schools are. I leave it up to the school committee and the council to see, how they can fund that. And then my hope is that the school department will soon hire a permanent finance director, and I can transition out.
So you were well aware, Mr. McHugh, that we were in financial disaster ahead of us, correct? I mean,
Well, was I aware before I got here?
no, I'm saying when you got here, I'm only saying this because we have a school department that knew, and a mayor that knew last year that we were going to get to this point. And I can speak firsthand, being on the school committee, when we had some huge cuts. And you had to stand up and be a big boy and big girl and stand in front of everybody and tell them what they don't want to hear. Okay? But we're looking at a situation where what we did this year, Madam Superintendent, I think we did a terrible job in making sure that we tightened that belt and made sure that we did everything possible to, when we get to this point, we wouldn't be this bad. So, to that point, usually we get a budget. I was accustomed to always get the school committee budget, even as a city councilor. So I love the point, but I'd love an actual budget if you can get that to me, because I'd like to look into the pieces that you don't hear about. How much money do we spend on consultants? How much money do we spend on people that we could have moved over to other positions and people could have picked up other spots? I work with Superintendent Belson. I realize he's probably the cream of the crop, but when we had drastic cuts in '08, the first group he went after was his leadership team. And he said, well, I'm going to feel the pain first. And I'm glad to see that we're going to move forward with getting to this budget of 79 million, which, by the way, does that bring everybody back on? Everybody that's cut, all the directors, with that $79 million, bring all those people back to their positions?
I think that's going to be a decision that the school committee will make ultimately, but I would say that it certainly reduces the devastating impact, but I'm not going to commit that we're going to put every single position back because we have, but by the time we get to that point, there could be other needs that come up as well.
Right, so that's what the misleading point of last evening and tonight is. So what I got, when I got the phone call this morning from parents and people saying, this is great. So Hannah's coming back to the band, she's going to go right back to her position. That's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Our head of physical education is going to come back, right?
Yeah.
State mandated position, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about secretaries, where I worked at the McGlynn School, knowing how 2 secretaries are important, vital to that process.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting back is saying, this is great, everybody's coming back, so that's not true.
No, I didn't say that. I said that I'm not in a position to make that decision. That's very possible that those
Okay.
positions do come back, but that's going to be when we get a final number, then the budget recommendation will be reprogrammed with that new number and it will go before the school committee.
Okay, so in full transparency, the reason why I say this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I wish the superintendent can help with me, but as we talk about these positions, we have to make sure that the community understands this doesn't make everybody whole again. Okay, so this is what we may have to make sure that, because people left last evening thinking, oh, this is great, we're going to get everything back. Okay, so we got to make sure that's not true. That's still left up to the school committee and the
It
administration.
might
Could
not
just
be true.
How the process works, once an allocation is made by the mayor, and once a budget is approved by the council, the school committee then has to reconcile the difference between the budget they've requested and whatever the allocation is. So if the budget they requested is not met, then there would still be a need for cuts.
Completely understand, but what the school committee said last night is go level funded at $79 million. Not for what the mayor's presenting, not as of last night. People left that meeting saying, we're whole again. We just don't want to be careful, Mr. President, because I don't want to come back to the city council that the city council wasn't transparent, because the questions they asked me and is that we don't know. That's not true. So even though we get $79 million, hey, I support it. Like I said, I want to make sure that we're whole with the school department. But I just want to make sure that when this happens, and let's say the mayor comes back and says, hey, we're going to go for an override, and that override is going to be passed, and you're going to get that $79 million. But understand to the community that this city council made sure that everybody's aware, that doesn't mean everybody's whole again. I just wanted to make sure that piece was clear.
Point of information, I have a question about this. I kind of think we're talking past each other and asking different questions and answering different questions. I think the question is, if the mayor allocated $79 million, could we use that money to bring everyone back on the payroll? And I think
the
that's.
answer, I don't think we're talking about each other.
No,
I think the
that's
answer
exactly
is
what I'm saying.
the school
That's
committee,
like,
the school committee has to vote on what the final budget is.
Yes.
Right.
And say,
All right, thank you.
let's say, I think.
I don't think we're going to make commitments that
No,
we
no,
can't
no,
make.
We're not making commitments.
No, but
I'm saying-
I do think, Counselor Scarpelli's question is being lost and the response is not helping. the case.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that if you, did you like to try to answer it a different way, Madam Superintendent?
I will try to answer it the best way possible so that if in fact we are granted the 79.4 million, I'm sure that there would be certain positions that would definitely be returned. However, that would be something that we would have to bring back to the committee to figure out which positions would come back. And of the positions coming back, if we were granted that number, we would definitely look at the other areas as well that the district continues to show need, or areas of recommendations or suggestions to improve programming in other buildings. We would also take that into consideration. So I don't want people to think that if we get the exact number, that everything that was listed as a potential cut is going to automatically come back. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Counselor Scarpelli, but I want to be clear that if we're granted that amount of money, we would definitely use it to advance and further
No, thank you. That's-
improve programming for students in the Medford Public Schools.
We understand.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent.
We're not
Councilor
questioning.
Scarpelli.
Thank you. And that's exactly what I was asking, because I think that understanding and make sure we're transparent enough to say, what you just said was perfect. Hopefully the community is listening, so when they come back and say, we're confused. So that's a huge piece that I wanted to clarify, and I appreciate you pointing that out for us. Okay. So, thank you. So I appreciate the budget book, if you can get that for us. I know that we talked about last year, and some things that were talked about were, where are we losing money? Have we looked at what are these shortfalls, and how do we really bring those numbers back? One being, we're seeing that we're losing a lot of kids to charter school, or our kids are leaving to private school, and why, especially at the middle school, high school level, mostly the high school level. So I think that, people realize that we do lose a lot of money when and then the reimbursement. Can you enlighten us on what we paid the charter schools in reimbursement this year?
I didn't really gather a lot of data on that, because the city, handles that account exclusively. But I want to say that in the Senate budget or the House budget, the reimbursement was about 1.5 million, and tuition might be around 8 million, something like that.
All right, so we'll ask the mayor. I think that's important. I think that the reason why I bring this up is, back in 2008, we looked at how do we find a way to even try to figure out, because pennies start turning into quarters, quarters into dollars, dollars into hundreds, right? So we looked at something like the summer programming, and I'm proud to say that I was one of the people that brought the summer program to the Missatech, and brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure we did that. And what we didn't see is one of the biggest needs was after school care, before school care, and we've done the best we can without the space. But these are things that I'm looking for to say, how do we bring more revenue back into the city, and at the same time providing a need for our students? I think that's going to be important as we move forward. I think that's just a comment. I know, I think that some of the biggest questions are rumors. I wanted to make sure we spelled a few rumors. If you can just enlighten me, because I didn't hear this, so that's why I'm trying to just figure this out to answer this for a constituent. Are we cutting foreign language at the high school? Or is that a process? Is that something that's on the table?
No, world language.
Okay.
The world language administrator position was one of the slated positions that was going to be cut.
Right.
However, we are not cutting any of our world language. We're still going to continue to offer world language. What we have done this year is we have looked at what students have selected, class size. There was a theater class at the high school level, just as an example. 11 students out of 1,200 high school students signed up for it in 3 sections.
Right.
That is not sustainable to maintain a 1.0 FTE for 11 students in 3 sections. So like one section only had 3 students sign up for that.
Okay.
So if it's something where there's significantly low enrollment, then that particular course would not be offered.
All right, and I think specifically, just to be upfront, is I think that the commitment with CASIC and bringing Italian to the elementary schools. And the rumor is that maybe Italian might be the language that's being dismissed. So that was one of the questions that.
One of the pieces of data we do have, and I can say that in full transparency, is that at this point in time, fewer students are signing up for Italian, more students are signing up for Spanish. So that's just I think a trend that they're starting to see, that students are selecting other languages.
Yeah.
So we are monitoring that, but it's not a decision based on saying we don't want one language or another. It's actually just based on student selection of courses.
Okay.
And then we go from there.
And I think that's important because I think that, I don't know if the funds have now dried up, that Ms. Petrangelo, former Italian teacher, left the school district. I believe she left $1 million at the time to make sure that foreign language, but mostly Italian, was something that she would leave her legacy. I think that's what's important. That's one of the questions, one of my former teachers. So I think that, I'd like to, if we can, maybe not tonight, but just get some information on that, Madam Superintendent, because I think it's important to see if we still have that in the budget,
Yeah,
what she donated. I know that.
Yes, Council, we will do that. There was a world language position at the high school that became vacant at the beginning of the school year. And it remained vacant for through scheduling, they were able to kind of work around it. So that position was in fact cut
And that was
at
that
the
was
high school.
Italian?
But no, the language program at the middle schools are fully funded.
And I appreciate that. Listen, I
Excuse me,
understand.
Jerry, when you say cut, you mean is in that batch of proposed cuts?
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
So like I said, I think that's important that, the questions that I'm reading up, not just from me, they're from former teachers, and when they hear these things, they want to make sure that the legacy of one of their former colleagues is still carried on. And I think that, I see so many students, my children included, that the Italian language, part of their culture, is very deep here in Medford. And I know that, I think maybe Italian families really don't feel, they feel a little bit slighted. And that's something that, just for transparency purposes, just to bring forward. So,
And I definitely want to just restate and double down that it's not, there is no intention
Yep.
or anything that out of the ordinary that the district is doing. It's
Yep.
the students that select the languages that they want to take. And I'm looking at it and I'm seeing, 44 students in one section of French 2 honors. And, if I look at Spanish 2 CP, 35 students. So the students are selecting the language
Yep.
and the families are involved in that. And so as long as there is interest and the students continue to select the classes, we will offer it.
okay, so I just want, just so you go, just with Ms. Petrangelo's funding, with what she donated, just to make sure that plays a big factor, because I think that as we move forward with this, when you have a teacher leaving a boatload of money, which is $1 million, a lot of money. So, and that was some years ago, so I don't know if there's anything left in that line, but understanding that with her legacy, her former colleagues that I've talked to, making sure her legacy's carried on, that we give her the respect, whether there's only 12 kids for Italian, we find a way to fund that class with what she left. That's my point. So I appreciate that. I completely understand that there's a need base, and we can all agree with that. So I promised Councilor President Bears that I wouldn't go line by line. I think that I've taken enough time tonight. I think the biggest question that will be during the budget presentation with the mayor, and I think that I'll be more vocal when it comes to how I think this budget should be funded, because I think that what we're seeing right now is something the mayor ran on in transparency. This community has yet to see in 5 years. And we've lost a lot of revenue because of, for what she has decided what's important to this community. And we've lost millions of dollars. We wouldn't be in the spot right now if the mayor was more transparent in the process, just no different than this process we're in right now. We found out I was watching the meeting, the 5 o'clock meeting, and the mayor was stunned about when you expressed the number. And she came back right away and said, this working group has been working on a override, Proposition 2.5. And I only bring this up because Council Bears and I talked. A lot of people I've talked to that you would think that don't want an override have blatantly told me, if we can see the financial picture, and is it true? Does the data prove that? If we had new revenue, if we went with 140B project, and if that 40B project brought in $3 million in permits, right? And then the new revenue, that's another $3 million out of that project. There's $6 million in new growth. That's one project that we fought, which, by the way, would be hundreds of affordable housing units. This is the narrow-minded thinking and the mismanagement of finances that we're seeing today in this community that is hurting the bottom line. The bottom line, it's scary to say, it's going to be our children and our seniors. So, again, Mr. McHugh, I appreciate all your hard work. You have the toughest job in this whole city. You know, you were given a pile of junk and they said, okay, go to work. And,
Well, I do have a lot of support from the staff and the central office and directors as well. I just wanted to make one small comment about the budget book. We will publish a budget book, and I'm happy to deliver you a copy when it's ready. But the gap, there's such a difference. You see the turmoil that was caused, the anxiety, with $2.2 million worth of cuts. And that was, what I would consider just kind of around the edges, to go up to 5 million, to have to disclose, huge cuts in staff and programs that wouldn't have been helpful at all. So it's kind of difficult to put a budget book together, with under those circumstances, but we do want to document what we did to get to the bottom line. And so I will get that to you.
And to that point, do you see what I'm saying? To that point, Mr. McHugh, we're a community that's looking at a $79 million budget line, and we truly don't understand it yet. That's what's frightening to me. We left here a year ago at this time, knowing we were going to be here. Another comment people ask, is the school committee still going to accept their raises? Well, sure. I would recommend still that we cut our pay to support that so we don't hurt the budget in any way possible, but that's my opinion. But when you, as the director of finance or the acting financial guru here, see how drastic and how difficult this process is, imagine what we're thinking. Imagine what the residents are thinking. Imagine the homeowner that's a senior citizen sitting back and someone's whispering in their ear saying that if an override goes through and debt exclusions go through and transfer tax goes through, that homeowner is possibly looking at thousands of dollars that are going to change their lives. So that's the fear right now. And so, and I appreciate that. I hate to put you on the hot seat because you don't deserve it, but this is exactly how everybody's feeling. And this is when I say mismanagement of finances in our community. It's not your fault, but it is. We can see it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Scarpelli. Go to Councilor Zarro.
Just a couple things. Point of information. First off, our city finance director did talk about the charter reimbursements. That's covered in the city budget, one of their line items. But it's like a graduated reimbursement rate. So it starts out higher and it gets gradually lower.
It's 180, 60, 0
Yeah.
over 4 years.
Right.
And Jerry was basically dead on. It was 8.6 million sending last year and 1.6 million reimbursed. So
Yes.
we lose 7
but
million of chapter
Bob
70
is
every
here
year.
tonight. So Councilor Scarpelli, I think if you wanted to ask him about that, he could probably show it to you.
No, I think the biggest piece, I think, Councilor, is that the understanding of is in trying to recover funding in any way we can, is finding a reason why we're losing.
I asked him
I
about that.
I would
that
like
night,
to
too.
request my fellow councilors please not engage in crosstalk.
Sorry.
And also I'd like to add to the meeting record, if we could request an update on the Petrangelo fund balance from the finance director. Council Lozaro.
Another thought I had is that I think it's possible that we may be losing students in the higher grades to private and charter because of the historic underfunding of our public schools. That being said, I do have a question that is pertinent to the work that our city council can do, which is about the homeless transport in the schools and the fact that it costs so much. I was wondering if you knew, and you may not, do you know if that is so much higher than it's been budgeted for in the past? Is it higher this year than it has been in previous years, or is it always higher and we just overspend?
Yeah, it's been around this level for a couple of years.
So it's just something that's overspent from
Right,
that and maybe
yeah.
pulled from
And
another
it's
line.
unfortunate, there's just more need and the lack of housing, so the available housing for these families are further and further out. So it's just more costly, but we are hoping through a rigorous bid process that we could take the opportunity to kind of reduce some of those costs.
Could you explain to me what you mean by rigorous bid process?
Well, we have to pay for homeless transportation in two ways. One is for the transportation that Medford's required to provide. Right now, we're getting quotes from small providers on an as-needed basis.
Taxi services?
Well, vans and companies have got into this business. It's door-to-door. And then we're also required to participate in the transportation that other school districts provide when they are the receiving district and we're the home district of that family. So that's just a check we have to cut when we get it. But we are working with the city purchasing director right now, and we're preparing a bid for all our transportation. We're hoping that could reduce the cost, but the underlying cost of transportation is also going up. The drivers are getting more money, the cost of gas, the cost of maintaining. So maybe the best we do is level funded, what savings we might achieve might be offset by higher costs, but
I am curious about the degree to which greater services for homeless families in Medford would allay some of the costs of transporting. And if you're finding that when families do deal with the effects of becoming homeless, if they have to find shelter further away, does it only happen when they are actively living in shelters, or does the transport continue when they have permanent housing, or do they then relocate to a new district?
The state has a very broad definition of what constitutes homelessness. So you could be homeless in the family car, you could be homeless if you live in Medford, but you have to move back with your cousin, because you're being evicted, or your rent's just gone up $300 or $400 a month because the landlord wants to get you out of the house. It's not based on whether you're in a shelter or whether you're not, but you, that's something that the registration office handles, and those are, private conversations with parents, but the benefit of the program, I think, even though there's a significant cost with it, is that it does provide a very limited amount of stability for the students involved. When everything else is completely unstable.
It's called McKinney-Vento? Is that what
Yes.
it's called? Yes, okay. It's very important for stability for students, and it's something that's important to support. It's unfortunate it's expensive, but I do think it's important. It's just like, how do you kind of find a way to balance it so that it doesn't necessarily have to be so expensive. But thank you for that
Yeah.
explanation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, the state does provide a limited amount of reimbursement for it as well.
Vice President Collins.
Thank you so much, President Beers. Thank you again for being here and for patiently answering all of our questions. I think I speak for all of my fellow counselors when I say we really appreciate it. And we recognize how hard this job is on everybody. And I'm not a number crunching person, so to me, it seems even harder. Thank you. I think it's very true that we went into this fiscal year knowing that it would be really, really difficult. And that's because we knew that one-time funding was coming offline. Everybody knew that. We talked about that. That was out in the open. We knew that we were coming into a year. We would have to transition from a lot of really important, often critical positions being funded by this one-time funding, which is now going away because of how this national grant funding worked. And now we're doing the work of figuring out how to transition away from that. And I feel really confident that every player in this dynamic shares the same goal of coming out of this budget season with a budget that includes a school department appropriation that gives the school department the latitude, the ability to put that money where it is going to best support students and teachers and all school staff and families. And I really do think that that is a value that everybody behind this rail, school committee, mayor's office, your team, administration, I think that is really shared. What I get out of that, for me, is saying, great, I support this $79.4 million recommendation. And that sounds to me like a number that will help us achieve our shared goal of doing right by Medford Public Schools. And budget seasons are hard work. This is what that hard work looks like. Making recommendations and reconciling them with what's possible. We don't get there by fighting with each other. We get there by working together. And I think like everybody in the community, knowing for not just 1 year, but for several years, that there was going to be an ESSER cliff, there being a lot of transparency around that, knowing that, coming into this budget season, feeling really anxious, feeling really worried, because this is too important. But I think if we continue to collaborate and say, what can we all do so that we get as close to that number as possible, so that we don't have to cut things that we don't want to cut, that's how this should work. For myself, I don't have any further questions, and I also want to reiterate, I want to leave the discussion of the line item positions and programs to the forum where those questions can be most thoroughly answered, and I think that's with the school committee. So for myself, I don't have any further discussion points. I don't have any further questions. We have a couple other departments to hear from tonight, and I'll defer to my other counselors, but I'll prefer that we move on to our next departments at this point after this very thorough, very appreciated presentation.
Thank you, Vice President Collins. Councilor Lemming.
Thank you. Just like everybody watching this to understand just a couple of basic things about the city's financial situation. So first off, this is a very long time coming, and it would be easy to sit here and talk about this or that decision, complain about everything under the sun, about why we're here right now. But at the end of the day, the problem is systemic. So Proposition 2.5 prevents the city from increasing its total tax levy, the total amount of money we take in from property taxes, by 2.5% every year. The average inflation from 1980 till today, 1980 was when Prop 2.5 was passed, that average rate has been 3.08%. So that means that the value of the budget in 1980 adding up would be about 3/4 as the modern budget would be about 3/4 as valuable as it was back then. This is somewhat offset by growth. So cities that have had a lot of development in the past 44 years, Cambridge over with Kendall Square, Somerville with Assembly Row have not had to pass an override. So, but Medford hasn't seen that sort of development just in the longer term. There are a variety of reasons for that. So I think that this is not a panel of judges criticizing others' decisions. It is our job to come up with solutions. I'm not going to sit here, hand either the administrators or the school committee 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes and tell you that you need to feed 5,000 people. That's just not how this works. I think that we need to get real about the budgetary situation and say that we do need an override of some sort, just because the system that we're in inherently leaves us with a broken budget. The problem is that if we were to pass an override, that money would not be available from now till the next fiscal year. So there's the matter of bridging that gap. It is not in the city council's authority to raise any of these line items. It is not in the authority of the city council to say, hey, we need to take, $6 million or $2.7 million from free cash and use that to fund the school systems in the interim. That is up to the mayor. The city council is working on a lot of other things, a lot of other initiatives which will address this fiscal shortfall in the long term. Not all of our solutions are perfect. We just got done with a committee meeting where I was proposing a commercial vacancy tax to help to address the vacant storefront problems in Medford. It's not a perfect solution. No solution is, but I'm trying to bring solutions forward to help address our problems instead of just complaining about the decisions that are made by other people and acting like I have no power in this situation. So that being said, that is what I personally think should be done about this situation. I understand that there are arguments against taking free cash out of reserves. We're looking to fund a new high school. Having an amount of free cash is important in order to get a good interest rate for the loan for that new high school. So in that way, spending that money now could end up just affecting the city's bottom line 10 years from now. But I do think that in this situation, it is more necessary. It is necessary to make that decision. I look forward to seeing what the mayor's proposal is. If she doesn't want to do that, or if she finds cuts in other areas. Obviously, I wish that other decisions have been made beforehand. I think that an override should have been passed a lot earlier, so that we wouldn't be dealing with this right at the edge of that fiscal cliff. But it is what it is, and people aren't looking for people sitting in these chairs to come up with complaints about a budget situation that obviously nobody likes. People are coming here to find proposed solutions to these problems, even if these are not ideal. I thank you for going through a budget that is just not enough money to go around at the end of the day and coming to us with what you can. And that's all I have to say about that. This council really can't make a whole lot of decisions about this realistically until we get another number from the mayor around what her proposal is. But we'll be able to come up with more definite answers after that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lemming. And as one counselor, I'd just like to reiterate, Councilor Collins and I proposed an override of $12 million in 2022 because we knew the structural underfunding of our city. That was tabled by a rule that then pushed it past the deadline and made it moot by another counselor at the time. In fiscal 23 and 2023, for fiscal 24, we proposed 3 charter amendments, which would have, we felt, better addressed the budget process. Those were passed by a 6-1 margin, but were not submitted to the State House. Mayor did not want to move those forward. And again, I think many of the elected officials in this community were elected because they clearly messaged the reality of structural underfunding of our schools and our city departments. We know there is not enough money to do the job. The reason there is not enough money, piece of it is that we've never done an override in 44 years. A piece of it is we don't have as much development as fast a scale as we want, right? I'm not saying that those answers can't both be true at the same time, but we are where we are. And one of those things takes 5 to 10 years. One of those things takes much less time, and we believe can actually affect this fiscal year. In the future, I mean, again, we've spent, what meeting are we on, Councilor Collins? Meeting 7 for the budget, but what meeting are we on the zoning? 5 of this term, and we did a whole zoning recodification last term, and we've approved multiple planned development district projects that have come before this council because this council has been focused last term with a very different membership, this term with a different membership on the idea that this community should grow and that growth needs to be an essential piece of our revenue strategy. So we're there. We have been pushing very hard as a council to have more resources in our finance department so that we have more transparent and open budget planning so that our schools and our city departments, finance departments are not so strapped that they're so worried about the next 2 weeks that we can't think about the next 2 and 20 years. So that's work that we have been doing. And it's essential work. We are now at the point I was worried we would be when I saw the fiscal 21 budget in the first 6 months of COVID, which is a fiscal cliff. That means if we do not find revenue now, jobs lost. Now, without that new revenue, we can have a debate, and the council has a role, not on the school side about this, about who we want to fire. I don't think any of us want to have that discussion. We could find $5 million in the budget, but it's 50 people in the schools or 50 people somewhere else, basically. That's the position we're in now. And looking back at the past is not going to change that, although I do think we should look to the past so that we don't repeat the mistakes in the future. So I hope that we can all at least agree on the fact that we don't want to fire people. Any further discussion by members of the council on the Medford Public Schools budget? Councilor Sykes.
I'll be really quick. I think I do agree with everything that the president just said. I am very grateful to Superintendent Edward Vincent and Director McHugh for the hard work that you've been putting into this budget season. I'm also very grateful to the school committee. I know we have a few members in the audience tonight for the work that they've been doing for the last 2 budget meetings. And I've had a lot of constituents write in today saying that the work that you all did to explain the budget last night was very, very helpful. And I want to make sure that that effort, doesn't go unmentioned. I am supportive. I support the $79.4 million that the school committee recommended for the school's budget. I know that the proposed cuts are painful, and I've been a student in many of the programs mentioned, and that's something that I'll fight for. I've made it the cornerstone of my campaign to run for city council, and I know. I think I can speak for every city councilor behind the rail that we will do our best to fight for as much money for the schools as we can get. I think that's, we're on record doing it. In the last few years, we've added millions of dollars to the school budget. We're going to keep fighting. And I believe in our council to do our best to try to reconcile everything.
Thank you. Any further questions by members of the
Mr.
council?
President, if I can.
Councilor Scarpelli.
Just to reiterate, I think that maybe some things are getting confused, some councils in translation, but the understanding, I appreciate you bringing this point up, that understanding to sit here and blame anybody right now doesn't get us anywhere, but to understand the process to make sure the bleeding stops when the same thing's being done over and over again. We have to identify that. And being the fact that this council is in charge of making sure that financially we're doing the best for every citizen, it's important to ask us the most important questions. So when I bring up the fact of 5 years of stagnant growth, of course that's a huge factor where we are today. Of course it is. I identified one development that would have brought our community millions of dollars. And that's one. So the key factor and the key process that I'm bringing up right now, and especially that everybody understands this, is not only with the mayor, and I brought up to council respectively, council president from June 20th, and then even with this financial process that we're talking about with this working group. When you're doing it in a bubble and we don't know what's going on, it's alarming. We're in big trouble. And now, sure, could we have looked at a debt exclusion or overrides in the past? Sure. This council, by the way, unlike anyone here, presented the debt exclusion for a new fire station years ago. And maybe one person was here that voted no on that evening, but it didn't go anywhere. But what I did was, I met with the financial director, who, by the way, is award-winning financial director, and Alicia Nunley, and she presented a breakdown of that debt exclusion to educate everybody, to understand where it fell. And at the time, it was $17 per household a month, with excluding senior citizens and veterans. So I understand completely what this council is looking to do, but it's how are we doing it? And understanding that maybe pointing the finger has to be done. Maybe people understanding, because you know what? To get this passed, if we really need it, we need everybody involved. We need everybody to see the light. Because all this is doing right now is further dividing this community, this process. Not that we don't need it, because I've already addressed that. I think that if it's done properly and the data proves it, and we can say, well, let's say we have 4 developments ready to go in the next year and a half. And we're ready to pull the trigger instead of fighting and going to court and denying and denying. Well, maybe that's revenue that we wouldn't be sitting here right now. So to my colleagues, we have to identify that, and we do have to look at pointing, because that's our job. We have to figure out where the mistakes have happened so they don't happen again, like Council Bear said. So this isn't sour grapes. I grew up in this community. I taught in this community. I coach in this community. I own a home in this community. I raised 2 kids in this community. I was in the school committee for 8 years. I've been the council now for many years. I've seen the ups and downs. I understand that things are underfunded. But if we do it correctly, everybody can get involved in this, and everybody can support it. But when it's coming the way it's coming out right now, and it's irresponsible, the process was irresponsible to date. And Council Bears and I have talked about this. He doesn't disagree in the sense that he wished things came out differently too. We've talked about this. So that's the process that constituents, maybe not some people's, but constituents that reach out to me, make sure I express that. So we look at every avenue possible. Maybe talking to the mayor and saying, okay, let's look at this right now. What we can do today to fund our schools, to get them level funded so they're not hurting. But at the same time, pause, get the information that we need, the proper information that we need, the data that we need, that everybody can marry and understand. Well, you know what? We do need a debt exclusion for this. We do need an override for this amount of money. I'm not saying not to do it. I would firmly believe if the data shows and everybody's part of the process, because I said this at the beginning, the difference that you're seeing in communities that have passed overrides, communities were informed they were part of the process. I'm good friends with the former mayor. That is probably someone that I put on the top of the mountain when it comes to mayors. And when I explained this to him, he says, well, explain the breakdown. How was it presented? And when I said, well, it wasn't presented, it was just mentioned. How irresponsible. So fellow councilors might not take what I'm saying as that they take respect toward it, or they feel that it's not needed. Oh, it is needed. Because that's what people put us in for. So I would never tell anybody here not to express your thoughts. But these are the thoughts that we can bring everybody together and find a way to get where we need to go. And like I said, if it's a debt exclusions, if it's overrides, I think there's a way to get there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Scarpelli.
Jerry, I appreciate you.
Thank you, Councilor Scarpelli. With all due respect, I believe that we will have something for this council and the people of the city of Medford to consider that will include all the data that you're talking about, the presentations that you're talking about. That is the intent. Certainly, I was here 2 years ago, right? I think we should have been having that conversation 2 years ago. Councilor Collins and I put something forward to have that conversation. We are now in dire straits and we are having that conversation, but I believe that what we will present is fully scoped and has that information, and everyone can get behind it, because that's what we're talking about here. I've actually seen in the past 2.5 weeks incredible unity among people who often disagree about the fact that the impact of the budget allocation versus the need of the schools would be devastating among people who don't often agree. I've had conversations, phone calls, emails, social media, all of that. So I believe we will get there. And again, I think the facts support both of the cases that have been made here. When you look at the new growth numbers, they go on DLS back to 2003. We're not talking about 5 years of lack of new growth. We're talking about 40 years of lack of new growth. But the last 3 years, since we started our zoning conversation, are the 3 highest in the history of the city. So we're making that work. We're talking about also on the override side, never done it in 45 years. So I agree with you. We need to do differently. This council, as I believe, including all of us, has been trying to change the tone on development and growth by updating the zoning recodification and implementing our zoning project, change the tone on budget by passing the city's first ever budget ordinance. And just speaking from the perspective of the financial task force, sometimes I feel caught in a catch-22 of, do we not say anything until we have everything fully baked so we can answer every question that you just asked, Councilor Scarpelli? Or do we say everything before we have any answers so that everyone sees every question we've had to ask? And I think it's in many cases an impossible choice. And also a choice that is not just the choice of myself and Councilor Collins, but of the group. So we're working on it. What you described is my goal. And I hope that I will be able to present to this council exactly what you described soon, because I believe that is my responsibility, and the faith entrusted in me by the members of the council and elected me president, and by the voters of the city of Medford by electing me as a councilor. So that is my goal. And with that, I'll go to Vice President Collins, and then we can hopefully go to members of the public.
Yes.
Vice President Collins.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think that as representatives, we hear some of what people in the community are feeling. I would never purport to hear what everybody is feeling or to know what everybody is feeling, but we all receive different trends and patterns in that. And I think that we can, as representatives, convey what we are hearing from members of the community, i.e. about an override, without going so far as to say that we know how everybody is feeling. I know who I've heard from. I know that based on who I've heard from, there's strong will to do what's necessary to fully fund the schools and maintain level service. What we're talking about is level service, not level funding. And I know that other people have concerns, and other counselors have heard those as well, and both things can be true at the same time. And I also do just want to note, because I know that some of these concepts are new to many residents, because it's true that we haven't done an override in 45 years, that if we do an override and or debt exclusion, or both to what degree, these are questions that will go before the residents. Everybody will be included in this process. This will go on the ballot. We'll have 5 months for everybody to be included in this process to learn about an override or debt exclusion if one is proposed, and for everybody to form their own opinion about if they're going to vote for it or against it. And I just wanted to make that really clear, that this is something that will be decided by popular vote. That's it.
Thank you, Vice President Collins. Any further questions or comments by members of the council? Seeing none, we'll go to members of the public. Thank you very much, Madam Superintendent, Mr. Finance Director. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Name and address for the record, please. Feel free to sit and use the microphone. And if you're on Zoom and would like to make a comment, please raise your hand.
I'm just going to stand, if that's all right. Anthony Gann, 45 Elm Hill Avenue in Leominster, Massachusetts, and I am the president of the Medford Teachers Association. I just wanted to speak tonight to, once again, as I did last night, give my full support to this proposed budget, the $79 million budget put forward by the school committee last night. And I just want to reiterate, again, what I said. This isn't, I don't consider this a radical budget. I don't consider this a terribly progressive budget. What this budget does is it keeps us level. It keeps us where we are this year. And I just want to warn against a few things that I can see on the horizon if this budget isn't passed. To get my comments public, last year, one of the first things I dealt with as the new president of the Medford Teachers Association was a sudden influx of kindergartners who, joyful, obviously, to get more students into the Medford Public Schools, but all of a sudden there was a great scramble because we didn't have enough teachers to cover it. There were teachers moving, there were teachers who had to find empty rooms and had to suddenly fill them. So the proposed cuts, especially at the elementary level, pose a risk because we don't know what the class is. And as it was mentioned today, that Brooks is seeing an influx of students next year, and it's, the end of May. So this, the last flux came at the end of August. So we don't know who's coming, and but I have no reason to think it's a lower population than it was this year. The idea of, when we lose students to charter schools and to private academies, we've got some hope here because we also have a waiting list for our vocational programs. Those vocational programs are producing award-winning machinists. We have students coming out of there who, the last two times I saw Medford Public Schools in the news now was a pair of young women who are getting into Harvard, two twin sisters who are going to Harvard. I had the pleasure of teaching, and a award-winning robotics team. And I think that's what's going to bring people into the Medford Public Schools. That's what's going to show that there's a very clear path in Medford to get into high institutions to show your abilities now. And like I said, we did that with the staff we have this year, and this proposed budget simply seeks to keep those positions. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yan. Any further comments by members of the public on the Medford Public Schools budget? Madam Chief of Staff.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of the City Council. Good evening. I think there was a lot that was said here tonight, and I can appreciate the various views that have been stated and the various history and historical perspectives. And I think it's important for me to represent and state some elements that come from, essentially the mayor's office as chief of staff. I've been involved in the city budget since 2022, or at least the development of the FY 2022 fiscal budget. I can tell you, and I think we can all let me start by saying that the mayor's office, as has been stated by President Bears, has been working very hard to try to find a way to carve funds out of the city side to provide additional funds to the schools. We are dedicated to doing that. We are working very hard. Our department heads have been very supportive in that process. The mayor, myself, our finance director, and our budget manager have met at least weekly throughout the budget process, but have been meeting and discussing in particular additionally since we heard the level of concern and numbers on the school side. Obviously, we anticipated a level of a budget cliff, and I'll get into that in a bit. We knew that there was obviously ESSER funds that were coming off. But I do need to take this council, if I could please, back a while back. And sometimes this isn't a popular subject to discuss or remind remind the community of or otherwise, because they were difficult budgetary times. But I do feel it's important to take us back to when the pandemic began and some of the levels of uncertainty that existed back then and how that unfolded in our operational realities of the budget process. I'm sure no one will forget the difficulties and the uncertainty that existed in March of 2022. That was the time in which the city was formulating the 2021 budget. In March of 2022, we believed things were going to shut down, and things did shut down, right? We remember when...
March of 2020, sorry.
Sorry, did I say?
Yes, you
20
said
I said 2022, thank you. March of 2020. We remember things shut down. We remember that hotels were closed. We remember restaurants were closed. Everything was closed for a period of time. We remember those impacts. And at the time, across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, communities were making very, very conservative estimates in their revenue projections, and we did no different. Our former finance director, Alicia Nunley Benjamin, made some very, very conservative financial projections, which has been very consistent with how our current finance director does that very same thing. Conservative at that time as the unpredictability of the pandemic had loomed. A year later, and that year, because of that uncertainty and a number of different factors that came in, the city had to use one-time funds. And those one-time funds ultimately became ARPA funds. The city used over, if I have my numbers correct, over $13 million in ARPA funds to balance the revenue side of the city budget.
We used free cash the year before too.
The year before too?
Yeah.
Okay. And as I recall it, looking through financial reports, that number was $5 million, but it was a much lower magnitude. And so then you fast forward to the following fiscal year, and we're still very much in the middle of the pandemic. There hasn't been significant relief now. You know, people are starting to travel, people are starting to go out, people are starting to spend money, people are starting to feel a little bit safer, but by and large, people are not feeling very safe. And so we had a situation where we were expecting, conservatively budgeting, as always, we were expecting revenue shortfalls to continue. We utilized on the order of magnitude of $7 million to balance the revenue side of the budget. And since that time, all throughout, we have been working very hard on the city side in the mayor's office and working with all departments, from city hall departments to other facilities to school department. We've been working very, very hard to try to tighten that belt to get to a place where we are, obviously not utilizing one-time funds. And for the first time in fiscal '24, we did not utilize one-time funds for the stabilization of the budget. We did use one-time funds to deal with a lot of backlogged capital work. We've used a lot of ARPA funds to do a lot of work that had been backlogged for decades, probably. We also used some small order of magnitude, obviously, for staffing positions when compared to those capital costs. So I really think it's important to tell the historical picture of how we got here. And, at the time in which the mayor was at the last budget hearing of the school committee meeting, yes, at the time, all she had known was a $500,000 budget gap in the FY24 budget. And so, yes, she was surprised. But this isn't something that's just happening to Medford. This is happening all across the Commonwealth. And I think if you ask the city's school administration team, you'll hear that same information. But I have data points to provide some of that information for you today. GBH published an article in May of this year identifying that with the header being "School Districts Across Massachusetts Weigh Teacher Staff Cuts and Staff Cuts." They covered communities ranging from Boston to Pittsfield in that article. They talked about Andover, they talked about Braintree. And I also looked on the state's website for the Division of Local Services, that the Division of Local Services, as obviously the council knows, but members of the public may not know, is an entity that actually helps, essentially regulates the work of cities and towns as it relates to revenue and budgets. They have a sheet that shows that there are communities across the Commonwealth that are going through budget overrides. And I'll just touch on a few. This can be searched on their page, dlsgateway.com. Arlington, fiscal 2025, override, general operating. Athol, two public safety overrides. These are proposed, not necessarily the wins or losses. Belmont, general government override with a note that says supplement cap budget and town school operating budgets. Boxford, 2 overrides for schools. Brewster, 2 overrides for schools in FY24. Brookline, 24. 2-way question operating override. I don't know what that stands for, but we know Brookline a little bit from some of the work we've been looking at. There are many other communities. As you can see, I'm naming them in alphabetical order.
That was how many through the Bs? 5?
I apologize?
We got through the Bs and that was 5?
Yes, yes.
Braintree's another one. We didn't even get through the Bs.
Thank you. So, and, you know, I don't even know that this needs to be said, but I just can't help but dispute information that is just clearly and evidently wrong as to transparency. The council had asked for the mayor to provide certain information as it related to KP Law bills. We've been back over this numerous times. Through you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, to Councilor Scarpelli, you made statements relative to KP Law bills and not having information and how you're adding it up to be $300,000, but.
476,000.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe anyone else was interrupted.
Yeah, if we could just. not
Thank
do
you.
that,
So those things, we transparently provided the information. We provided a warrant from 2020 to April of 2023, identifying all KP Law payments. We also provided information relative to a survey that we did of 16 of 16 communities, and Medford ranked 3rd lowest in terms of per capita spending for legal service costs. And we disclosed at that time that our estimated per year was $450,000. So there is no surprises here. That is contained in, through you, Mr. President, to Councilor Scarpelli's email inbox. And lastly, I think it's important to touch on development. Frankly, this is an area of the organization I don't work very closely in because the mayor works very closely in. The mayor hired the city's first ever economic development director. We are working with with Sal, and of course, I'm forgetting Sal's last name right now. I apologize. Thank you. Obviously, he was with the council this evening. He was talking with the council this evening. It's my understanding that he was going to announce grant application that was submitted on
Yes, we talked
vacant
about
storefronts. Wonderful. Wonderful work that's been going on. There was a press release that was issued by the mayor as to development and over 500 units that had been done. And there were issues as to prior 40B projects. Again, I can't necessarily speak to those things, but I know that our planning development and Sustainability Director Alicia Hunt is here this evening for her budget presentation and may be able to touch on some of those things if there are questions. But I think I just felt the need that I had to address a number of issues that were stated here tonight as to the perspectives from the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chief of Staff. Councilor Scarpelli, I was going to recognize you already as
Thank you.
you had a point directed through me. Councilor Scarpelli.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad to see that our Chief of Staff is, I commend her. She's coming here as she usually does and stands up and defends the mayor, because that seems like that's been common practice with our Chief of Staff. I will tell you the numbers that I shared are numbers that were given to us by her office, and I believe there was a comment a few weeks ago that the law line item was $50,000. That wasn't true. When you do the actuals and you count it up at the time for that 1 year that we did have, which we expressed, is a question because we're seeing the mismanagement of financial process here in the city. You can blame COVID again, but that's getting old because it's, as Medford's fighting about COVID, I could talk about communities too. And I won't give you numbers from Athol, Massachusetts. I'm going to talk about our neighboring communities. Malden, flourishing. Everett, flourishing. Somerville, flourishing. New growth everywhere. We're touting a beer hall on Mystic Ave. So when we talk about transparency, there's been huge lack of transparency from that office. Even the fact that what I heard the other night, looking back at the meeting, that a city solicitor is not important. It's a disgrace. The city solicitor works for the community. He's that check and balance. That person's that checks and balance for the city, for this body. So there's a lot to be said in what's going on, because when it's time, everything will come out when the mayor is here, because I think that's one thing people are missing. Is that when things are tough, I believe she said that to Councilor Carviello when he ran against her for mayor, saying that Mr. Carviello doesn't want to make tough decisions. He wants to say yes. Well, guess what? It's been tough for the last 5 years, and we haven't seen much happening. So you can blame the pandemic, you can blame whatever you want to say, you can look at whatever numbers you want to look at, but the truth is in what we live in every single day. You might not understand that because you don't live in Medford. So, but no, that's a valid point. You're touting something that, and not understanding what the community has expressed to us. So don't belittle that, to me at least. So, the understanding that when the mayor gets here at budget evening, we'll go over it, we'll discuss it, we'll debate it. Because we're here, like we said, in a more mutual understanding process, is that we understand that there's a process that we might need a form of overrides or debt exclusions. But I don't think it's done in a transparent manner. I've mentioned it, I'll say it over again, and I'll stand by that. I sat with this mayor. And what she worked with, sitting next to me for years, isn't the person that's trying to run the city right now. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Scarpelli. I'm going to take the spirit of compromise and just say a little bit about what I disagree with both of you about. And first thing I want to say here is I appreciate, but there are many staff in the city who do not live here. The chief of staff was with us for 4 hours at fire stations on Saturday, came here. I don't question her devotion to serving the city, even though I may disagree sometimes. We have disagreements. We all have disagreements. I'll go first with just some additional context on the budget. I appreciate you adding that, Madam Chief of Staff. I just want to also add, when you mentioned the 7 million FY23 gap of the one-time funds we used that year, that was a major driver of Councillor Collins's and my proposal for the override at that time. I do respect that we were able to not use one-time funds in future years, but also there were things cut between the initial FY23 proposal and then the final budget that was presented to us because of that use of one-time funds. So that means that there were things that the city was doing, and probably the schools maybe as well, depending on the process a little different, that we weren't able to do because we were trying to reduce that reduction on one-time funds. So that's really where I think many of us are coming from on the structural underfunding. And then the other piece is, I really appreciated you starting to list the overrides that all these communities are doing across the state, because we do have a common financial fiscal issue across the Commonwealth, across the country with the ARPA expiration. We did use some one-time funds for FY24 on the school side with ESSER. I know we are all aware of that, but that, it wasn't a structural gap in the general fund, but it was a structural gap in a sense. That we, I remember June 21st, Councilor Scarpelli was talking about the 20th. On the 21st, I had an event and I said, we need to work together to keep as many of the ARPA and ESSER positions as we can on the budget. Mayor was present there as well. And work has been done. I mean, I am impressed, especially on the ARPA side, how much we're able to keep on. So I do want to acknowledge that. But I think the other piece of it, and it's not really a disagreement with anyone here, I think the other piece of this, part of the fiscal issue that we are all seeing in commonality, is cost growth. We are seeing over the last 2 years, a huge increase in costs that is devaluing the amount of revenue we have. When Councillor Lemming talks about how over the last 45 years, because 2.5 hasn't kept up with inflation, we have less money, that has accelerated over the last 2 years significantly. Councillor Lemming was using a CPI price deflator. That doesn't actually reflect government purchasing. There are price deflators for government because government purchases very specific things, not the things that a person, we're not buying a lot of bread every day necessarily as a percentage of our budget or food. We're buying concrete, we're buying healthcare, we're buying, pensions, and we're paying salaries, right? And those things have been going up really significantly. So that's just the other piece of context that I really think is important to add. And when we talk about the fiscal picture of all these communities, and especially the reason why the override and the need for additional immediate revenue is so much more dire today than it was even 2 years ago, is that the costs are just out of control. And when costs are going up like that, government, we can't keep doing more with less. That's what we're seeing. If we want to, quote unquote, keep it tighten the belt more, now we're not talking about, I believe Sherry said, working around the edges. We're talking about core programs of the city and schools. That's where we're at. Now, where I just want to point to Councilor Scarpelli, we bring up Malden a lot. Malden gets $65 million a year in net revenue from the Commonwealth. Their Chapter 70 allocation is tens of million dollars more than us. They get 65 million, we get 20. Their new growth the last 4 fiscal years has been almost $1 million less than the city of Medford. So it's not a comparable community. Malden is treated very differently by the state and isn't growing as much as we are on the new growth numbers. So, I just want to bring those facts to the table, that context to the table, and again say that I really understand the frustration everyone has with the uncertainty, understand the frustration of the public, of our educators, of fellow members of this council, of members of the school committee who are not part of the financial task force, where we have not said this is our plan yet. And we have not presented a plan and had that debate yet. It is coming very soon. We are at the 0 hour. We are at the decision point. And I believe that we will present something that we can all see the details of, have those details discussed and debated, and then bring this community together to vote for in the fall to say that we're going to address these serious financial challenges that we face. So I appreciate the perspectives of everyone. I think we've had a healthy discussion generally. And with that,
Mr. President, I just have one new piece of information
Madam
to
Chief of
add.
Staff.
The only one piece of information that I meant to include in my statements is just, it kind of dovetails from some of the things you just said and some of the things Councilor Lemming stated in terms of, costs outpacing. When we have a 10% increase in health insurance, which is $3 million, that is 1.5% of our budget increased right there off the top. That dramatically affects our position as it comes within the constraints of Proposition 2.5. And there's just no two ways about that. And then the only other thing I should probably say and address is that we've been working very diligently, the mayor, the finance team have been working very diligently to come off of these funds because we are trying to, we need to, and the mayor is against the use of one-time funds. I need to say that transparently to this body. If you haven't heard it, the mayor is against the use of one-time funds. The analogy she uses to express that is if your, let's say 16, 17-year-old teenager came to you tomorrow and they said that they got $500 worth of gifts for their birthday and that they wanted to lease a car, would you let them lease a car from that? So I'll leave you all with that. I do appreciate the discussion. I appreciate the time that was afforded to me to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from members of the public? Seeing none in the chamber, I do see one hand on Zoom. Jess H. Jess, name and address for the record, please. You have 3 minutes.
Jessica Healy, Fourlock Road. I just have a question because I always hear from the chief of staff, I believe she is, but not the mayor, and not to, down her at all, but we did not vote in the chief of staff. We voted in the mayor. Is there going to be a time that we're able to ask her questions regarding everything that's going on?
There will be a time when, no, you will not be able to ask her questions directly. You can make comments. Generally, the mayor presents the budget at the budget meeting when the comprehensive budget proposal is submitted.
Okay. And now what happens if everyone's talking about the override? What happens if it doesn't go through? Have we thought of that?
Yes, there would be drastic cuts that would be devastating to our community.
I'm understanding, but have we figured out if it does not go through, how we're going to?
We would not have the funds to fund our schools.
Okay, so we used to have the funds, but we don't anymore.
And we've discussed extensively how Proposition 2.5 and cost growth has reduced what those funds can buy.
Okay, so the 2.5 override will go directly to our schools?
The mayor and the financial task force have announced a proposal to do so, yes, and we plan to put out the details as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from members of the public in the chamber? Seeing none, I will go to Charlene Douglas. Name and address for the record, please.
Charlene Douglas, 414 High Street, Medford, Mass. So I just want to state something that occurred at last night's school committee meeting. The student reps on the school council wrote a proposal about the use of the free cash money to alleviate the deficit to the school budget. And I ask you to look at that and support that as a council. That being said, I also understand and hear both sides to this argument about overrides and what should we do as a city of Medford. And as a resident of this city and, a taxpayer, I truly understand about the taxes and everything. However, I must say this, if we do not do this properly, there is no way that this will pass. So if we need to truly have an override, we need to make sure that there is a proper information out to the public. And that must be done, and that is extremely important. And the last thing I want to say in relationship to the opera funds, when we use those funds to support the schools, such as newcomers, teachers, and things like that, things we knew, the union stated, we knew that we would need. There was no way we can't have a newcomer teacher and some of the other programs that were funded by opera funds. So that, to me, was poor judgment and poor use of opera funds. So I just want to state that because I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. I just want to say that it is my highest priority as council president that any proposal for an override or a debt exclusion has all the information needed. And that obviously there is the public process to propose one, there is the public vote, but that is the work that we are doing and I intend to continue doing. And I'll leave it at that. Any further discussion on the Medford Public Schools budget by members of the council or members of the public? Seeing none, Planning, Development, Sustainability Director, Alicia Hunt. I don't know if you've been watching our previous 6 meetings, and thank you, Madam Superintendent, Mr. McHugh, once again, and all the residents watching. We are working on this. We have basically our process is that I'm going to read the top lines for the overall budgeted amount and the head count, and then read through the change sheet, and then we would love for you to share, fill in any gaps, share your budget narrative, and also we would love to hear about items you did not request or not included in this year's budget request that you plan or would like to see in the future. We understand it's a difficult budget year, but we do want to hear about what we are not doing right now that we would like to be doing. So with that, I will go through quickly. Planning, Development, Sustainability, fiscal 24 budget, $779,084. Fiscal 25, $812,897.91 for an increase of $33,813.91. There's a change in headcount from 8 to 11. That is 2 part-time interns, and that part of the full-time climate planner is moving from a grant to the general fund. And basically all of that is fixed cost increase with the COLA for non-union positions, moving over that climate planner position, and some increase for maintenance and dues and subscriptions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Director Hunt, for the Planning, Development, and Sustainability budget.
Good evening. It is late. I did not really prepare remarks for this evening because I have been working extensively with the council on a lot of different initiatives, and I did realize that it was going to be late at this point. I think that it's most useful for me to just briefly address headcount and then some of the changes a little bit. So, you're very much correct. The number of positions of full-time increases by one. It's the climate planner, which is frankly what I said at this meeting last year I was coming back for. But we got the grant that has been funding it this year. And we actually have obtained a grant that will fund her position for 2 more years for 40% of her position. So what we are looking at doing this coming year is actually just, and I'll be very specific, putting 31% of her salary on the general fund. Some of that funding will be from ARPA for the first half of the year, and the other percentage, I'm not doing math at this hour, I apologize. The other percentage is coming from a Mass Clean Energy Center grant that will pay her to do outreach among the Medford community, run the Electrify Medford program, which we have just started running, which is to help Medford residents electrify their homes. Offer coaching and advice through us training and paying some coaches as well as volunteer coaches around solar, heat pumps, electric vehicles, and there's some funding in there for some consultants to back up all of our consultants or all of our coaches. And so this will pay for Brenda to manage that program. And then the money that's in the general fund in ARPA is for her to do all the other energy things. A lot of this is backfilling work that I have been doing myself since I became the director of planning, but has been traditionally done energy efficiency work, solar, those types of working on our climate plan. The other reason the number looks a little big is that we had been carrying the number 2 for interns, which is just seems to me to be arbitrary. We've been for the last several years running with 4 interns in our office at any given time. And we do fund it through various ways. The increase in salary for part-time employees is in fact going from $20,000 to $30,000 is to reflect the intern budgets and to help pay for them. I'm also hoping to pay for them off of other places. Sometimes we get grants to fund them, some CDBG, et cetera. The actuals for this year in part-time is pretty high and that I just wanted to be clear is not what we've been paying interns. But you're aware that our economic development director and our economic development planner both left early in the year, but they both actually agreed to stay on part-time and help and work with our office to support us while we searched to fill those positions. They were extremely hard to fill. We're thrilled with Sal DiStefano, who's our new economic development director. We also have a new planner, but we did pay Vic and Yvette part-time during the year, and their money was basically moved into that line. That's why our permanent employees was so low and part-time was so high. So it's kind of artificially high, but we were also using money from vacant positions to pay for interns. And I felt very confident. We're going into this calendar year with a full slate of staff. There are no vacancies. So I said, I really would like to see some money in the part-time intern budget because I can't dip into my full-time salary budget just to cover those interns this year. The other changes are mostly structural around shifting things around so that we're paying for them where they should actually be paid out of. And my goal is actually when we all see the actuals for this year, we'll see that some of my line items were overspent and others were underspent. And that is because we needed to pay them out of the right places. Repairs and maintenance machinery. My office has been actually paying for and managing wind turbine annual maintenance for 14 years now. And this year we have started with solar. We have 3 solar arrays, 2 that are owned by the city, and we're hoping our plan is to install another one this coming year. So we have added a solar panel maintenance contract as well. And so that is to reflect the costs of the wind turbine contract and the new solar panel maintenance contract. There was, I think, that was the main shift from last year, right? Like I shifted some money into dues and subscriptions to more accurately reflect things like we belong to the Mystic River Watershed Association Stormwater Outreach. And that's a dues that the city pays for outreach. We belong to Power Options. And then there are various membership organizations around economic development and community development and planning that we as a city belong to, and we pay for out of that line. And I moved the money there to more accurately reflect. And because we have actually been paying for many of those just out of professional technical services, we lowered the professional technical services to reflect that we were shifting the money to where it was actually being spent out of, rather than me saying, oh, I need new money for this. And then because the budget cuts were so difficult this year, that is the line that made the most sense for us to cut a little.
So
to
you
sort of
shifted
help.
10 and cut 20.
Yes,
All
we
right, thank you.
shifted 10 and cut 20 from professional technical. And so in the big picture way, that is the bucket that we pay for consultants out of, and we pay for grant matches. For example, we have applied to a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. This year, I'm doing it jointly with DPW, and it is a forestry vulnerability assessment, but it is also to update the city's municipal vulnerability assessment, because our vulnerability assessment was last done in 2019 with 2017 data. And so this would update that with current 2024 data, and give us actually an interactive website on our climate vulnerabilities. If we were to get that grant, I believe I should have written it down, but I think the match is like $30,000. So rather than going to the mayor or this body for that, we would just have that money in my budget. And so we have some funds there for brownfield consulting or climate consulting or grants that we would get that where the matches are of a reasonably small number, that it's just easier to pay for it out of our budget. I think that generally covers it. If you wanted me to go into more detail, we can.
Anything new you'd like to do that's not in here in future fiscal years?
When I want to do new things, they're really big and really expensive and wouldn't be covered in a budget like this. It would be large capital expenditures. I'm working on the partial electrification of the McGlynn Andrews School. That's going to be a multi-million-dollar project. Our parks projects are very large, multi-million-dollar projects that we have to go out and get grants for and other funds for. They're not going to be in this. What I do like to use this money for is sort of the starter. You have to have a certain level of design. We actually had just applied to a Green Communities grant that we may not get because we don't have it advanced far enough in design in order for them to feel comfortable funding it. They may actually want us to pay for a $30,000 to $50,000 design step before they'll award us the $500,000 grant. So that's another example of something that if we get turned down for that grant, it's probably going to be in our best interest for us to just touch my budget, go get that design work done, and then apply again to Green Communities.
So seed money for grant funded
Yes.
projects would be a key priority additional to have more.
Absolutely.
If you had more, you could get more grants.
Absolutely. And honestly, a lot of it is, I feel like we have just become fully staffed in January. And I want to run with this staff for the next several months to see how are we doing, what's the workload. Sometimes, so a couple of years ago when I came at this meeting, I said I didn't want any more staff till the finance office had more staff because they were our bottleneck. Now things are moving through finance because they did get the extra position a year or two ago. So I'd like to run with the staff, see how much work we can get done. And if the bottlenecks at that point are our staff or somewhere else in the operations.
Great. Bob has left. I'm just going to make my one comment, then I'll go to, does anyone want to have a question? Okay, then I'll just make my comment anyway. Bob's not here, but this is really a message for Bob. Maybe we can include it in the report. I just love how few line items are in your budget. I think we're at like 12 or 13. I love that. It just makes it easier. It's everything has a name that I can kind of at least understand, and I don't have to ask for an extra explanation. I understand some of that is GAAP and some of that is state determined and whatever, but I just think it's a really clean budget where I understand what everything means, and that doesn't mean that the information isn't there for every other department, but to me it is a model of naming conventions for ordinary expense line items. So as an extreme nerd, I will close there. Any further questions on the planning development sustainability budget for the director? All right, we'll go through the boards.
I was going to say,
Rapid,
yeah,
lightning speed.
I have the boards.
I've got Board of Appeals. And it's looking like that's going up,
It's because of,
1350.
it's because of the positions increases, the number of positions on the
The
board,
number of.
the number of positions for those stipends.
Great.
Yes.
So that's going from 11,150 last year to 12,500 this year because we increased the size of the Board of Appeals
Yes.
to avoid any quorum issues, I believe was the main reason.
Yes.
Community Development Board, no change. On Board of Appeals or Community Development Board? Sure. Yep.
Question I'll ask this commission. Are there any openings and boards and commissions? Are those all residents?
All of the boards and commissions that my office is currently staffing, I'm just slowly making sure that I'm not missing anything. All the positions are residents. I've had the Energy and Environment Committee, one of our members moved out of Medford and asked if they could continue to participate with the board. They get no stipend. They don't make decisions on anything. They're mostly a volunteer, like a organizing. So we haven't actually asked her to step down.
And I can.
But all
understand
of
that.
these that are funded boards
Yeah.
are
Decision-making
100%.
boards.
Decision-making boards are all Medford residents.
Yeah, all due respect to that. I think that I appreciate the hard work people are doing, and I understand keeping them on right now. But I think as we move forward, I think it's important that we give the opportunities for Medford residents to take those positions.
Yes.
So I appreciate it.
Energy and Environment is
Thank you.
unlimited number of
Energy
people,
and
right?
Environment and the Bike
Okay, I
Commission
know that.
both have open number of membership. There's
Okay,
no
Thank you.
rules. So we generally will add people in a group as
Oh,
we
that's
feel
great.
like we've lost a
They're
critical
advisory
mass.
committees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Take it all back then. I apologize. I think that's that's great.
Yep.
We will take someone else's free labor for our committee.
If you have an expertise and you want to work, let's do it.
Yep.
Great. All right. So
Development.
if those questions are answered, I saw no change for Community Development Board. Looks like a small stipend reduction on the Conservation Commission.
So my notes are that we can't figure out why the number was what it was last year. We think that at some point there was a miscalculation in what either the rate was or the number of members. And so we went through this several times because
Got it.
this is accurate.
So that's going from 8,200 to 7,500.
Yep.
Got it. Historic District Commission, it looks like a stipend is proposed and there's been a shift from special projects to the stipend and to professional fees.
Right. So some of the boards are so all the boards that are staffed by city staff, some of them get stipends. And this is one where the Historic District Commission said to me, we would really like to be asking more of the staff person who's helping us. Prior to the pandemic, they and the Historic Commission and the Bike Commission actually had no city staff support at all. We manage their budgets now, and we manage their Zooms, and we post their agendas. The Historic District Commission said they would like more robust support on more of the things that they're doing. And they said, could we get a stipend to justify that? And they were willing to shift the money from within their other things they spend money on too.
Who in your office is going to take that on?
So we had asked Jessica Martinez, the new economic development planner, if she would work with that. And I will just say for transparency that not all the boards and commissions have stipends with them. So there are several that people are staffing with no stipend. But in some, the Affordable Housing Trust comes to mind. It is part of the role of the housing planner to support that. And we have said since that job was created, that part of that job is supporting that commission.
Yeah.
At the point that they have a lot of money and it takes a lot of time, we may want to reconsider that, but as a startup. But I just thought it was fair to say, for example, the Historic Commission, there's no stipend associated with that.
And that's significant. Yeah. Something that this council has discussed prior years, try to get some uniformity, some equity across all the boards and commissions, look at all of them, because it seems like it's just we make one and we set this, and then 20 years later, we make this and we set this. So I think when we're not triaging the budget, that is something this council's interested in if we have the time to get there.
Right, and the stipends across the board for the different boards and commissions, there doesn't seem to be, I don't understand where those numbers come from, and they are not, they're on the city's webpage, you can see them all.
Yep. Historical Commission, we have, it was FY '24, $38,050. FY '25, $35,000. It looks like just a reduction in professional fees and a reduction in the unclassified line item, which I believe was a grant match of some kind.
So, right, so their money is to pay a consultant to do the studies of different buildings that come in front of them to say whether or not they're actually historic. It should be preferably preserved. And then they get grants and their grant matches. When the mayor was asking people to please cut budgets to help with the budget, they said that they would figure this out and they would be okay with a $3,000 cut in the spirit of helping the city with its budget struggles.
Thank you. And Bicycle Commission, 1,500 last year, 1,500 this year, no change. And that's for supplies and stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Any further questions on the Planning Development Sustainability Department or the boards and commissions which it helps to coordinate? Seeing none, thank you, Director Hunt.
Yeah.
Any further questions or motions in this committee of the whole meeting, which is our final budget preliminary meeting, number 7. I should have led with that. Last one, budget 7. On the motion to adjourn. We do not, we believe that on this timeline, the 31st was the deadline. We believe we've met that by getting us, with this being the last meeting. I'm seeing a nod, yes. So that should be our goal, which is great. And the last thing I'll say is Celtics 92, Pacers 88. On the motion to adjourn of Councilor Lazaro, seconded by Councilor Callahan. Yeah, they got back pretty fast. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes.